Rick the Geek. And today on this episode of Riding with Rick, we're going to answer a question about roaming. This question comes to me from several people who have seen recent commercials and news stories about the proposed merger between T-Mobile and Sprint. People have read that it might affect people's roaming ability. So people have asked me, what is roaming? And so I figured I'd tackle that question. Roaming, the concept of roaming is actually a concept that's been around as long as cell phones have been in existence. And essentially what roaming is it means that you're using a network that is operated by a company other than the company that your cellular phone is subscribed to. Now, what that means in the early days of cell phones, what that would mean is, in the very beginning of cell phones, there was only Ma Bell, AT&T, the Bell system for cell phones. In 1984, when they broke up the Bell system, the cellular telephone system was split up in the same way to allow regional companies to operate cell networks. In other words, just like you had New England Telephone in New England, and you would have had Bell Atlantic in the Mid-Atlantic states and Pacific Bell in California and whatnot, the cellular telephone system was split up the same way. But when they split it up, they also split it up in such a way that you could have two companies in the same area providing service. You would have the A carrier, which would be a company that was not affiliated with the local telephone company. And then you would have the B carrier, which would be the company that was affiliated with the local telephone company in the area that the cellular network was operating in. So in where I live in New England, for example, your A carrier was a company called Cellular One, and the B carrier was 9X Mobile, which later on became Bell Atlantic 9X Mobile, which evolved into what we know today as Verizon Wireless. And the A carrier, ironically enough, Cellular One was bought by a company called Singular, and then Singular became part of what is now known as the new AT&T. So what this would mean would be, if I have a cell phone, if I was to buy a cell phone from 9X Mobile at the time, what would be called my home area would be, if I remember correctly, it could have either been Rockingham County, New Hampshire and Greater Boston, or it could have been Stratford County, New Hampshire, and most of New Hampshire and Maine. And that was just how the network was divided up. So that network that I chose, I would have my number would be based out of there, so I could get a number based out of Rockingham County, New Hampshire, or Boston, Mass, or whatever. And my home area would be that area. And then the cell phone company would give you a map of where your home area was. You know, you'd have it highlighted in a particular color. And if you were outside of that home area and you needed to make a phone call, you would be what's called roaming. And it has to do with how the system worked from a technical sense. Essentially, every cell phone that is on the network, the cellular network has to know where the phone is. And the computer technology that was available at the time, in the late 70s and early 80s, when the system was being designed, it could only keep track of the cell phones in a certain small area. So the concept of roaming was was based on the technical needs of the system at the time. So if I took my phone and I went to California, okay, in the very early days, before they had it all automated, I would have had to notify my company, my cell phone company, in this case it would have been 9X Mobile, to notify the company in the area that I was going to be in, and say, hey, look, Rick the Geek is going to be in your area. The cellular number is this, the serial number of his phone is this, and I would be temporarily added to their system. And in order to reach me, the people that was calling me would have to know, okay, hey, Rick the Geek's in California this week, so we got to call a special number. It was called a roaming access number. And so they would call that number, then they would punch in my cell phone number and maybe some sort of an access code or something. I've never actually used this system, so I'm just going on historical information here. And then that's how the person that was calling me would reach me. And of course, this would add up to a rather princely sum on my cell phone bill at the time. I remember we're talking about a time when you might have paid $60 a month for your cell phone and you might have got a whole 10 minutes of airtime with it. A little bit later on down the line, they automated the roaming system in that the cellular companies would sign what are called roaming agreements. And essentially what it meant was that, okay, Joe Schmo Wireless in California was going to be an authorized roaming partner of 9X Mobile from New England. So if someone from 9X Mobile from New England, like myself, went to California, or someone from California, where Joe Schmo Wireless was covered, would travel to New England, they would be able to roam on the network, possibly at a reduced rate, but also in an automated way. So I would be able to pick up my phone when I got to California, dial, I think it was *18, if I remember correctly. And this would, what's called, register my phone on their network. So what that would mean is that their cell phone network would say, okay, I have Rick the Geek's cell phone number, whatever, serial number, whatever, is now active in this system. And they would send a message, an electronic message, back to the system that ran the New England, ran 9X Mobile New England system, to say, hey, Rick the Geek's cell phone number, whatever, is now in California, so send all the calls that go from here, that send all the calls for Rick to our system, and we'll deliver the call. And that's how it worked for a long time. And of course, as technology improved, the system evolved to the point where it is today, where you don't have to dial that code anymore. There was different codes for different types of cellular networks. So some places you would dial *18, some places you would dial something else. I just used to sell Verizon Wireless, so that's the code I used to give people. So this is how even roaming works today. Although now the different networks are run by the same company. So in other words, if you're a customer of what is now Verizon Wireless, or T-Mobile, or Sprint, or whatever, the roaming still happens, but it happens automatically. So the minute you go to California, the minute I land in Hollywood, or wherever I end up going, I turn my phone on, it signs onto the network, it says, hi, I'm here, my serial number is whatever, my phone number is whatever. The system says, oh, okay, and it all does everything automatically, even though it's still owned by the same company, even though it's still a T-Mobile network or a Verizon Wireless network or whatever. Matter of fact, this even works a lot of times internationally too. So that's essentially what roaming is. Now, roaming also, what it allows cell phone companies to do is it allows companies to say, hey, we have coverage everywhere, even though they don't have coverage everywhere. And by that I mean, okay, if cell phone companies had their way, they'd have a tower every 20 feet from the tip of Maine to the bottom end of California, figuratively speaking, of course. But cell phone companies are restricted in where they can do business because they are essentially small radio stations. That little cell phone that you have in your hand is a tiny radio station, and the tower is also a radio station, a little bit bigger one. So where they're allowed to operate is based on rules and licenses issued by the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. The FCC says, okay, Rick the Geek Wireless, for example, is only allowed to do business in this county in New Hampshire, in this county in Maine, and this county in Vermont, so on and so forth. And you're only allowed to put a tower here, 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 and here. And you can look this up. This information is actually available on various FCC databases. Interesting reading, by the way. So, but of course, Rick the Geek Cellular wouldn't do very good business if I said, well, we got coverage in Stratford County, New Hampshire, and Suffolk County, and Essex County, Massachusetts. But, if you head out to Worcester, well, you ain't gonna get no service. Wouldn't work very well. So what would happen would be, okay, I would have to sign agreements with other companies to say, okay, Rick the Geek customers can use your towers when you go to Worcester, for example, we'll say, and in exchange, I would allow people from, whatever cellular company I sign up with to use my towers when they happen to be in my area. And that's how roaming works today. In most cases, it's really transparent to the user. Usually you don't even know it's happening. But sometimes you do. And it will say it on your phone. Your phone will actually tell you on the screen. If you're a Verizon Wireless customer, it'll say Verizon on it. If you're a T-Mobile customer, it'll say T-Mobile. If you're a Sprint customer, it'll say Sprint on it. But if you happen to be in another company's area, it might say some other company. And you should check with your cell phone provider to say, hey, listen, am I okay to use this in this area, without having to pay extra for it? Because sometimes you do pay extra. Sometimes you're only allowed to use a certain amount of data. Sometimes your data will be slower. Matter of fact, it might even say you're on a 2G or a 3G system, even though you have an LTE phone. So that's what roaming is. Most of the time, it's transparent to the user, especially in cases where it's not going to cost you anything extra. But ever since the traditional days of cellular telephones, roaming means cost extra. So you really should check with your cell phone provider. And usually, you're going to find it most in areas that your cell phone company does not specialize in. For example, Verizon Wireless will say they might specialize in covering the areas that are rural in a certain region, but they may not have good coverage in the big cities in a certain region. Whereas T-Mobile might have good coverage in the big cities in a certain region, but they might not have such good coverage out in the sticks. That's why they have the roaming system in place. So that's what roaming is. And it is a pretty high-level overview. There's a lot of technical details that I've glossed over. But that should give the basic idea of what roaming is. So, with that, I'd like to just let you know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can get a hold of me on the socials. You can always email me at rick@rickthegeek.com. That's rick@rickthegeek.com. You can also put comments here on this video or get me on Facebook. And if you have any comments, suggestions for future topics, any questions, technical questions that are burning a hole in your mind, feel free to ask them, and it might be a future topic for Riding with Rick. And as always, thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm Rick the Geek.